So, my blind father-in-law was acting extremely strange. I installed cameras and I was going to get to the bottom of this, and you guys will not believe what happened. Let me tell you. I never really knew how marriage can be absolutely insane sometimes. When they said you marry your husband's entire family, they weren't wrong. But it's not necessarily a good thing. It all began 2 weeks ago. Before that, it's important to mention how I got to the point in the first place. Around 4 months ago, I met my current husband, Jackie, on a hike. He's from the Philippines, and we were going up the forest trail when I got dehydrated and fainted. Jackie helped wake me up and stayed with me for the entire hike. It was only a couple hours, but we talked so much and got to know each other so well. It was definitely one of those love at first sight moments. Over the next couple of months, Jackie and I got to know each other even better. He told me about his life in the Philippines and how he immigrated here for a job in very respectable marketing agency. And he used to work for them online in the Philippines and then got offered a full-time job here. Jackie was always coy about talking about his parents and family though, which I always found strange but went along with it, assuming that maybe they've had a bad relationship and did not want to be too insensitive. Fast forward to those 2 weeks ago, when Jackie's parents were about to visit us for the first time. We didn't really have a wedding, just a small get-together, and his family could not make it. So this was really the first time we would see each other besides pictures and videos. I was super nervous about meeting them, especially that they were from such a different country and culture, and I had no idea how they would react to me. When we picked them up at the airport and waited for some time before finally finding them, Jackie's reunion with his parents was so cute. His mom hugged him tight and made the usual joke about him not eating enough, which I would have found insensitive, but it was a nice moment and I didn't care. I had a laugh with Jackie and his mom before noticing his dad struggling with the bags and coming over. Jackie introduced me to his parents officially in person. I hugged his mom, who was super nice and just kept complimenting me, saying that Jackie has good taste. I noticed that his old dad was struggling with the bags, so I went to introduce myself and help carry one of them. He insisted that he carries them, but I almost pulled one of them out of his hand when our hands accidentally touched, and I could almost swear he gave off this tiny chuckle before letting the bag go. I joked with Jackie's dad, and he got his looks from him, before his dad defensively said that Jackie has his mother's features, and that his good looks are his own, and not his son's. His dad seemed sweet, but kind of arrogant. I didn't know if he just rubbed me in the wrong way then, but that hand touch was too convenient. We made our way to the car and back to the house. Jackie's parents were going to stay over for 2 weeks. I don't mind, but I thought it might be a little much. I had set up the guest room for both of them, and all they had to do was unpack their bags. As soon as we arrived, I gave them a tour of the home and showed them their room. We were going to have lunch after they finished unpacking. I was just unwinding in the bathroom a little bit. Sometimes I like to go in there just to stare in the mirror and disconnect. It was kind of my, alone time. At least it was. Before Jackie's dad suddenly entered without knocking. As soon as he saw me, he looked away but kept the door open. Jackie's dad stood at the door and apologized repeatedly, but he kept the door open. I don't know why he kept it open, but he thanked me for the hospitality, and soon as he noticed that I wasn't decent, he just maintained eye contact to a frightening degree, never looking away. I don't even know if it was strictly eye contact he was maintaining. He signaled goodbye and closed the door. I don't know why, but there was something about him that just made me feel slightly uncomfortable. He seemed like a sweet old man, but at the same time, I didn't know if it was just the way he carried himself, but he had an awkward smile as he went about things. I didn't give it much thought though. After they unpacked, we set the table for lunch. Jackie's mom helped me with the plates while his dad was in the bathroom. We had already sat down when Jackie was in the center, me on his right and his mom on his left. When his dad came out of the bathroom, he sat in the middle between me and Jackie's mom. We talked a fair bit about work, married life, Jackie's childhood, and so much more. It was fun, until Jackie's dad dropped a fork under the table and insisted on him getting it. He went down to get it and I suddenly jittered as I felt something touch my leg. I guess the scare caused him to bump his head on the table on the way out. Jackie tried to comfort his dad and asked him what's wrong. His dad explained that underneath the cover was dark because of the cover reaching down at the table, and quote, the table has too many legs. They all believed him and just took care of him, but I was still uncomfortable by his touch. It didn't seem like your average looking for the fork touch. It seemed deliberate and slow. I felt uncomfortable, but I did give him the benefit of the doubt about the covers and the darkness. Perhaps he really did not mean it. Let me get you some ice cream, Mr. Garcia. Just head over to the couch, I said, reassuring him. The next day was as chaotic can be. We were planning on taking a long ride into the city, so being a dad, Jackie's dad had to be 100% prepared and began to prep the car. He was changing the oil when suddenly we heard a massive shout. Everyone ran down from their rooms to the garage, where we saw Mr. Garcia laid out on the floor, grabbing his face and shouting in pain. The oil had spilled over into his eyes. Jackie was in shock as he just ran towards his dad to see what happened. His dad kept saying that he couldn't see and that his eyes were hurting. Jackie asked for my car keys and I gave them to him. Everything was so surreal. Jackie shouted as he carried his dad into my car and drove to the hospital. Jackie's mom was crying and panicking, and after she had calmed down a little bit, we took an Uber to the hospital. As soon as we entered the hospital, we saw Jackie frantically moving up and down waiting areas. I asked him what they did, and he told me they moved his dad to the ER to get his eyes washed. Jackie was worried, but he seemed more angry than worried. I never asked him why he talked so rarely about his dad, but it seemed like there was more to it than I knew. Jackie and I kept comforting Jackie's mom until the doctor came out and told us what happened. The doctor told us that his dad was suffering from some sort of distorted or lack of vision that could last a couple of days at most. When we asked if it can be permanent, he says it's very rare for it to be permanent. Well, after a few hours, we took Mr. Garcia back home. I told Jackie I would take care of him, and his wife and I took a couple days off, since Jackie had quite a busy week at work. The week started off fine enough, and I would make breakfast for Mr. and Mrs. Garcia and bring it to their room since Miss Garcia had bad knees, and she just can't stand for long. I didn't mind helping them, but what came after was much worse. On the second day, I was helping Mr. Garcia up the stairs to the bathroom. I held his hand, obviously, but sometimes his hands would slip out and he would frantically move it around, trying to find my hand again. While we were going up the stairs, his hand definitely missed mine and touched somewhere else. I gasped, but then he realized that he couldn't see. He apologized, saying that he can't see where he's touching, and asked me to hold his hand instead. I grabbed his hand again to let him up. That same night, I was helping him get into bed when he touched me again. In another area this time. Each time he apologized and said he can't cope with this temporary blindness. This went on for the entire week. Although the doctor said that it was temporary, It would only last a couple days, etc. I don't know if I was being harsh, but I was starting to get uncomfortable with how much he would, quote, accidentally touch me. I reached my breaking point when I was asleep next to Jackie, when suddenly I felt a hand touching me in the middle of the night. I thought it was Jackie at first, but then I screamed very loud when I opened my eyes and saw Mr. Garcia standing there. Jackie immediately woke up and was panicking. His dad said he went up to our room because he needed to take his medicine and couldn't find it. When I asked him how we got in our room in the first place, he looked nervous and told us that he had memorized how to get to our room by feel of the wall and the staircase and positions of the paintings. After Jackie gave him his medicine, Mr. Garcia felt his way around the wall and back downstairs. Right after that, I had a fight with Jackie about how he couldn't take it anymore. I told him about all the, quote, accidental touches and how it made me feel very, very creeped out. Jackie kept trying to make excuses or defend his father, but then I snapped and told him that he never even talked about him before, and I demanded to know what happened between them both of them. For about an hour, Jackie told me about his complicated relationship with his father. As a child, Jackie felt like his parents' marriage was collapsing, as apparently Mr. Garcia had married another woman in secret, and they found out much later. This caused a rift between Jackie and his dad, and for the biggest part of his childhood, he felt like his dad just wasn't there, and that he didn't care about him or his mother. The older Jackie got, the more the rift between them grew. They never acted much like father and son. Jackie never met his father's other wife, but he knew that his father had commitment issues. But when he was married to his mom for as long as he was, they had to figure things out. Jackie told me that he recognizes his dad's mistakes, and that he had his, quote, wild years, but that they've been trying to make amends recently and acting more like father and son. I respected that they were trying to do better, but I could just not buy the sweet old disabled man story his dad was putting up. I was convinced something was up, and I just could not let it go out of question, or how he could get in our room in the middle of the night where there was no sound coming from the room by just feeling the walls. I had a crazy idea, but it was worth a shot. I waited for Jackie to take his mom and dad to breakfast on a Saturday, and I made my move. I installed a hidden camera in Mr. and Mrs. Garcia's room, one in the kitchen and one in the basement, just in case he made his way there. I was convinced that Mr. Garcia was putting on an act. Yes, an act, and I was about to prove it. On the first day, I didn't get anything. Mr. Garcia spent the entire day in the kitchen, chatting with Miss Garcia and Jackie before taking a nap, spending some more time with Jackie on the porch, and then going to sleep. I was disappointed, but I had a voice in the back of my mind telling me that maybe he really was blind. The next day, I felt I got something. Right after I helped him to the bathroom after breakfast, he went back to his room and opened the drawer next to him, taking out some sort of box, checking it, and then putting it back in. No way a blind man would be able to see what's in a box and close it. I had to find out what's in that box. I waited until Mr. Garcia went to the porch for his daily chat with Jackie, and I snuck into the room. I opened the drawer and took out the box, and to my surprise, it was a picture of me and Jackie on vacation from our room. I have no idea how he got it there, but I was suddenly feeling very uneasy. In the evening, I went downstairs and saw Jackie's dad sitting alone in the living room. I sat next to him and offered him something to eat or drink, when he patted me on the thigh and said, "Thank you." I made up this story about how before I got married, Jackie and I always had a thing for older guys. I could just see his hands twitching when I said that. I was playing around with my hair silently in front of him, and if he was really blind, he wouldn't have been swallowing so hard and tapping his foot. That night, I watched the video feedback looking for more evidence. I felt like Sherlock Holmes when I finally got to something. Mr. Garcia was also a diabetic, so he had to measure his food very carefully and count exactly how much he's eating. In one piece of footage, I saw him sneak into the kitchen at the middle of the night, open the fridge, grab some ice cream, which he then proceeded to measure and open some sort of notebook and wrote something down. This was it, hook, line, and sinker proof that he did in fact see. All I had to do was trim that footage and find that notebook. In the morning, I waited until everyone was seated for breakfast before I excused myself and made my way to the bottom drawer, where I moved some of the stuff on top and finally found that notebook. "What do we have here, Mr. Garcia?" I yelled as I opened the notebook and read it out loud. Every day was written down with the date, and food intake was measured and written down perfectly. Jackie and his mom were staring in disbelief until I played the video on my phone. Jackie looked at his dad in disgust, like all those bad memories suddenly rushed back to him. I explained how his dad kept touching me inappropriately, and then blaming it on what is now proven to be temporary blindness. Mr. Garcia just stared at her husband in disbelief before leaving the table, and just going into her room with tears in her eyes. Jackie grit his teeth in anger, telling his father that he never really changed and that he was always unfaithful to his mom. Even worse, Jackie kept scolding him about how he had to ruin this for him as he had ruined so many things before. I'd never seen Jackie this mad, and I could have sworn he was about to hit his father. His dad dropped his head in shame, whether real or pretend. Jackie hurried into his mom and dad's room. I could hear some mess being made in there, and a few minutes later, Jackie went out with his dad's suitcase, fully packed, and threw it right at his feet. Jackie pointed at the door and kicked out his dad, telling him that he never wants to see him again in his life. His dad slowly got up, grabbed his suitcase, taking a minute to look at the door, waiting for his wife before realizing she won't be coming with him. He nodded his head and headed outside the door. He stood outside the door for a moment, looking at his furious son with rage in his eyes, before turning around and starting to walk away. We just stood there waiting for him to get out of sight. Later that week, Jackie's mom returned home, after taking some time to unwind. Jackie had no idea what happened to his dad, but the following week he got a call from his mom telling him that his dad had gone back to the Philippines in humiliation, and that she told his brothers and family about what happened, and they're getting a divorce. In the divorce, he would have to pay what he had in savings. Apparently, even his family were ashamed of what he has done, and weren't going to allow him to stay there after the divorce. He may just end up homeless. This was such a strange story. I'm glad in the end, though, everything seemed to work out for the best. Jackie's still with OP and their relationship's thriving. However, OP's father-in-law is going back to the Philippines, so it seems like Jackie and him aren't going to have much of a relationship. Let me know what you guys thought of this story in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your opinion, or if you have a similar story or situation you would like to share. Our next story on the day is an Am I the A-hole story. Am I the a-hole for uninviting my bio dad and his family from my wedding after he talked about wanting to walk me down the aisle? Sounds strange, but let me explain. If you're new to the channel, smash that subscribe button. Here comes story number 2. My mom passed away when I was 14. My bio dad, BD, married his new wife, Jane. Probably a fair partner now that I reflect back on their relationship as an adult. Married less than a few months after mom died. BD, aka bio dad, brought Jane and her kids to mom's funeral. After bio dad and Jane got married, bio dad treated Jane's 3 kids as his own, while basically pushing me to the side. Something he did often was telling me,
"Oh, can you hold this?"
while passing me a present he bought for one of the step-siblings. He would smirk at me and say something like,
Nice, isn't it? Perhaps if you've gotten an A on the math test or done a better job at cleaning the house, I might have gotten you one too."
I also want to note, BD and Jane expected perfect grades and constant chores from me, while my step-siblings were just encouraged to try their best, and had no chores. I went to live with my maternal grandmother after a few years, because I was in such a bad place mentally from living with my bio dad and Jane. I met my fiancé John in college, and we'll be marrying in September. I'm extremely close with my family-in-law, as they've basically adopted me. I'm especially close with John's parents. I've barely kept in contact with Bio Dad and have just about no contact with Jane or my step-siblings. Birth Dad emailed me saying if he should show up to my wedding 2 days or the day before because he expected to walk me down the aisle. I told him that my father-in-law was walking me down the aisle. My bio dad responded,
"Oh, come on, you must be joking, right?"
and started getting really aggressive and saying stuff like how he can give me a life and provide me for 17 years, so his honor is his right. I responded to Bio Dad that he lost that honor when he threw me aside for his new wife and kids, and he's lucky that I haven't gone no contact with him at all. BD continued to try and argue how it was my right, and acting like my decision to have father-in-law take me down the aisle was some temper tantrum. I told Bio Dad that if he cannot act civil and stop making my day about him, he and his new family are no longer invited to the wedding. I've also blocked his email and plan to keep him blocked for a while. Friends and family of my bio dad and Jane are reaching out and telling me how, quote, heartbroken he is, that I'm not letting him walk down the aisle because he's never going to have the opportunity to walk his daughter down the aisle again, and I'm going overkill to ban them. They're also saying how I look just like my mother, so it was probably hard being reminded of his wife when he looked at me, and that's why he was, quote, distant after marrying Jane. I told them none of those excuses are good, plus it's my wedding and I can do as I want. But they told me that attitude made me a textbook Karen and bridezilla. John and his/our family support my decision, but Bio Dad and Jane's loved ones say I'm not even realizing how important this honor is for BD. So I'm looking for non-biased perspectives on here. Please drop your comments down below. I do not think OP's the a-hole at all. There was one comment from the original thread that I saw that a lot of people agreed with. Let me know if you guys agree with this comment in the comment section down below. Not the a-hole. Tell him if he would have been an A-plus father, he would have gotten the honor. Unfortunately, he wasn't, so you had to pass the honor on to someone else. Your dad is a jerk with no remorse. I hope you get a genuine apology someday and never talk to him again. Guys, let me know. Was that too harsh or was that right on the button? That's all the content I have for you today. Don't forget, if you're not subscribed to the channel, the single most best, absolutely crazy good way you can help support me is very simple. Just press that subscribe button. Okay guys, have a wonderful night and I'll see y'all tomorrow.